Alan, you were on hold before we went to that break, where I brought up how the public, when they watch television, it's admitted, they taught this in RTF, go into a dream state or a hypnotized state, and that now studies show, and we've read these on air, and you can go over them, I know you're an expert on this, that the public is more suggestible because of television, and a lot of people are staying in this unconscious, glazed over mode. What are we dealing with there, and how did the scientific dictatorship implement this so cunningly?
We got to go back into the histories of the publications of some of the members of this world movement, like Huxley and others, Lord Bertrand Russell, who talked about the whole notion of peace and how they defined peace, and that was to eliminate all conflict throughout the world. And that meant right down to male and female conflict, which meant that the separation of the family unit, the disintegration of the family unit even, was essential for world peace. But they also said that individualism had to be destroyed, and what that meant was they would have to target specific parts of the human brain, and those parts which gave you your self-preservation abilities, your perceptions, the same things that animals have, wild animals, that keeps them alive. And people like Arthur Koestler, who was a propagandist and a member of MI5, who wrote lots of novels and non-fiction books along this particular line, wrote one book called The Ghost in the Machine about the elimination of this part of the brain. And he mentioned how departments within the United Nations were working on methods to lobotomize this part of the brain, and they tried different methods, including chemical lobotomization, viral attack through inoculation, and various other means. Now, they have done this, I am pretty certain. They've been pretty well successful with most people, and it was to be augmented again with the kind of technology that Brzezinski was talking about, technotronic era, in his book Between Two Ages, where he talks about techniques used, scientific techniques, electronic devices, which would, and he meant from the basic units of television onwards up to literal ELF waves from towers, affecting people's minds and eventually directing them. He said eventually people won't know where their thoughts come from or where their opinions will come from. They'll be unable to think for themselves. They'll expect the media to do their reasoning for them.
And by the way, just a quick interruption to back you up. Then, 6 years ago, the Baltimore Sun reported that DARPA, for over a decade then, that's now almost 16 years ago, has, quote, put up towers in major cities and is testing calming us. Yeah. So see, just an incredible run for the hills revelation. They're already bombarding us. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, that ties in with a report that came out of Sweden from the Swedish newspaper, the Finnish newspapers, Finland, where scientists there had used a standing cell phone tower, one of the big tall ones you see in the countryside, and they were monitoring the brain frequencies of passers-by in a certain area, a radius of a few miles, and eventually they could actually identify each individual, and without moving anything on that tower, they could target any individual within 3 feet.
And this is all mainstream news, but people listening are laughing right now. Folks, it's 2008. This is Buck Rogers.
Oh, it's here. It's here. And you go through the airports now, they have camming lights, and they're also using this technology in the airports. They have blue, greenish lighting, and it's called calmatives. They're using calmative technology to cam them.
And that was in AP 3 weeks ago. In fact, Chertoff had a big demonstration of it. And they're using passive MRI, which from 100 feet away is scanning the brain, which they're now putting on the cell towers, as you mentioned. Everything Alan Watts says is documented. I have separately read it in mainstream news, everything he just said. Hidden in plain view. We'll come back, Alan, and I want you to... You've got the total floor here. In fact, I'm gonna just sit back and listen. I want to break down how they're doing this, but more importantly, why am I immune? Why are you immune? But this stuff only enrages me. There is a scientific dictatorship. They've written hundreds of textbooks bragging how they're doing it all to us, brain damaging us with mercury, injecting us with different cancer viruses that are hormonally triggered, age-triggered to kill you. And the cancer rates are going straight up. Every other disease, degenerative type of affliction is intensifying. And it's being done scientifically by people playing God on huge power trips. And it's real. And it's happening now. So I was getting into how the public is mesmerized, how more and more they are in a matrix-like condition. Their brainwaves are different. And then now it's intensifying. I'm not bashing video games. I know big video game designers, a lot of them are big fans of the show. I've been stuck in a bunch of video games, where the video games, you get to the final level of, some of the most popular games, and they open the safe up, and it's my videos in the safe, the ultimate answer. Just all sorts of craziness. But the point is, the video games, something about the added controlling the joystick with the not moving and the intense focus gets you into a lower than dream state, which is a unnatural state of near-death narcosis. And actually causes endorphins to flow. That's why these kids love 10, 15, 20 hours. I remember I had video games when I was a teenager. They were more primitive, but I remember a few Saturdays, I never got that heavy into them. 2-3 hours would go by like that, and I'd be sitting there in a daze, but like in heaven, totally focused, going through all the levels. And later I saw the scientific reports that I was in a artificially oxygen-starved narcosis. But that said, going back to Alan Watt. Alan, lay it out for us.
Yeah, these techniques they copied a lot of this actually from the yogis of India. They studied them. They studied some of the top yogis in the 1800s and early 1900s and did all the measurements in their body and so on. They're intrigued by the guys who could go into this almost trance-like states, death-like states, with very, very shallow breathing, and they measured the oxygen content in their bloodstreams and how they survived, etc. But they also were measuring their brain patterns. And what they found, too, was that people in such brain pattern states could be very easily influenced and directed with outside information being pumped into them. You're easily led, you might say. Things that seem absurd to you in a fully conscious state, you'll take it at face value and accept it without thinking. And we know they were using these techniques because the military-industrial complex were using these games long before the public had access to internet or video games for their military training. And they found the same thing, that the people who were trained in the more advanced games to kill on sight would actually do it in combat in the battlefield. And what they found too, when they did immediate tests on these particular soldiers who would kill, they found that their breathing rate was much shallower too, just like as though they were in the video game. So they're going into the same response mode in the battlefield as they were on the video game. They were trained to do that. So it has that effect on you. We also know that the Japanese are leading the field in this area. And we do remember that some of the earlier games that came out were putting out. Thousands of children saw it on television.
Pokemon.
Yeah, and they all went into epileptic seizures. Well documented. And we get that published in mainstream media. And then the public go and buy the games.
Let's explain again. Every time it would show in what they admitted was a test, tens of thousands of children would collapse convulsing. The problem was they knocked their teeth out or busted their eyes. They got hurt, and so they quit doing it. But in a test, anytime they want, they can flick the switch and make you fall down on the ground convulsing.
Mm-hmm. And what they found too with these games, you see, this isn't just the games. It's the parts of the brain that they want to target to alter behavior, mood, serotonin levels, etc. And it's the temporal lobe they were aiming for. The temporal lobe is very, very important if you want to control people. And the types of epilepsy that they were inducing was temporal lobe epilepsy, and where they go into a fugue state. And now people who have epilepsy will often get the initial fugue coming on them, where things seem unreal to them. They're moving in a surrealistic world.
It's like a hallucination, or some people call them the quizzles, where they're in a sleepwalking state. Mm-hmm.
And that happens before they go into the actual grand mal seizure. and they can have a fugue state again of complete amnesia when they come out of it. So this is the same kind of thing that they're inducing by going for areas of the temporal lobe. Now, it's interesting, too, that everyone addicted to cell phones, which also affect the temporal lobe. It's doing similar things there. People are mesmerized on these phones. They'll stand there and talk on street corners for hours and hours. Hours go by.
And I'm going to stop you again just to back you up. I have seen, literally, I saw 2 or 3 today, thousands of university and government studies. And I remember one about 8 years ago because I had a buddy who was always on the cell phone. I noticed his behavior was changing. He was always on it for no reason, just jabbering. And before, he'd never been on the telephone. You couldn't keep him on it. And I remember reading that it raises the brain up to 3 degrees in temperature.